All right, so first day of chapter 2. You should all have a notes packet. It is blue. If you don't, go grab it. They're on my desk. Today is 2.1. It's all about angle bisectors. Bisect or bisector, or it's a term you're going to hear a lot in this class. So we got to make sure we all get on the same page with it. First, we have bisect. So bisect is to divide a segment into two congruent segments. Segment bisector is when you bisect a segment. So we're going to start with a segment. We're going to cut it in half. The actual bisector can be a lot of different things. It can be a segment, ray, line, or plane that bisects a segment. And then midpoint. Midpoint is the point on the segment that divides it into two congruent segments. Let me back up a second. So if we have that segment over there, segment AB, and I put a point right in the middle, that would be the midpoint. Okay? And the midpoint bisects the segment, which means that this half or that side is now congruent to that side. So right in the middle, called the midpoint, and it creates two congruent segments. Congruent segments have the same length, they're equal to one another, and we show that in a diagram by marking them in the same way. So we have M as the midpoint. So it's right in the middle of the segment. It bisects the segment. So now we have two congruent segments, okay?
Yes.
I need to find the length of AM and MB. This line right here indicates that the whole thing is 26 units long. So each of the sides is going to be 13. Is that what you were going to say? Very good. If you're like, how do they know that? You can think of what number would you add to itself to get 26. The actual operation you're doing there is you're dividing 26 into two congruent parts. Okay? So 13 and 13. Questions? Now this one's a little different. Do you see how the 7 is just above this, or well, it's below this time. But there is no indicator that it's the whole thing. So you can just assume it's this littler segment right here. But P is the midpoint, and these two are marked as being congruent to one another. So if RP is 7 units, how long is PS?
7.
Also 7. And then how long's the whole thing? 14. And again, you could think of multiplying by 2, or you can just think 7 plus 7. I usually just think of it as adding. But you should get the same answer. What are your questions?
How was your weekend?
It was good. How was yours?
Well, it was okay. I didn't see you today.
Nice. So this says line L is a segment bisector of AB. Find the value of X. So if they're congruent, what does that mean as far as the algebra? Congruent means the same. The same means congruent. Congruent means no. Equal. Equal is the word I'm going for. So I'm going to make these two equal to one another, and I'm going to solve the equation to find the value of X. It is 7. You divide both sides by 5, and you get that X equals 7. Very good. All right, so we talked about midpoint already. It's the point right in the middle of the segment. It creates two congruent segments. But we're also going to look at midpoint when we're looking at graphs of coordinates of ordered pairs. And that has a special formula that we follow to find the midpoint. So the coordinate of the midpoint of a segment, it's actually the averages of the x's and the y's, and it makes a new ordered pair. So the way we find the average of two things is you add those two things together, divide by 2. So here we're going to add the x's, so the first x and the second x, divide those by 2. That's the x value of our midpoint. We're also going to add the y's, so y1 plus y2, and divide that by 2. That'll give us the average of the y values to find the midpoint.
So it's always going to be divided by 2.
Yep, because there's 2 points. So basically you'll be looking at a line. This will be like x1 and y1. And way over here we'll have x2 and y2. And to get right in the middle of those, you just find the average of the x's. That'll be our x coordinate. The average of the y's, that'll be our y coordinate. So this says plot A and B, then use the midpoint formula to find the midpoint of the segment. Sometimes these won't have a graph, they'll just have the ordered pairs. I actually prefer when they have the graph because you can check your work really easily, all right? So first we're gonna graph 1, 2. So we go right 1, we go up 2, we're gonna put an A. To graph B, we go right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We go up 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the segment AB. I'm trying to find the point that's right in the middle. Now I'm going to remind you of what the midpoint formula is really quickly. So we're going to add the x's, divide by 2, add the y's, and divide by 2. The question is, which ones are the x's?
The first numbers.
The first numbers. This one's x1, this one's x2. The good thing is, if you flip-flop them, it doesn't matter. As long as you're adding the x's together, dividing by 2, adding the y's together, so 2 and 4, and dividing that by 2. So what is 1 plus 7?
8.
And what's 8 divided by 2?
4.
4. What's 2 plus 4?
6.
Divided by 2?
3.
3. This is the midpoint. 4, 3. Now, since I have a graph, I can check my work. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Does that look like it's the middle?
Yeah.
It does. So it's pretty likely that you did it right if your ordered pair is also on the segment and looks like it's right in the middle. If you get a point way over here, you've done something wrong. Okay? All right, so for number 5, we need to graph 4, 0. So we go right 4, and we don't go up and down at all. That's A. B is left 3, down 1. And then we're trying to find the middle of that segment. Yeah, side of your idea is really good for graphing. Okay, instead of writing out the actual formula, I'm just going to jump right into the work. I need to find the average of the x's. What are the x's? 4 and negative 3. Add them together, divide by 2 because there's 2 numbers and you're finding the average. Average of the y's. 0, negative 1, divide by 2. All right, what's 4 plus negative 3? 1 over 2. You don't need to change it to a decimal. Just leave it like that, 1/2. What is 0 plus negative 1? Negative 1 divided by 2. Now, you might think, oh, these are fractions. It has to be wrong. I don't know. To graph 1/2, negative 1/2, go halfway to the right and halfway down, and that's right on the line, and that looks pretty good. I think we're good. Questions? So, same thing, just no pretty picture off to the side, but you also don't have to graph, so it's kind of a give and take on this. So define the midpoint of segment PQ. I need to find the average of the x's. Which ones are the x's?
Negative 2 and 5.
Negative 2 and 5, divide that by 2. What about the y's? 3 and negative 1, and divide that by 2. So that's going to be 3 over 2 and 2 over 2, right? Which simplifies, you could make it a mixed number. I don't really like mixed numbers, so I'm going to leave it 3 over 2. And then 2 over 2 is just 1, right? So there we go. Now, if you did have to put it on a graph, a mixed number would probably be easier to graph than an improper fraction. But you don't need to make it harder on yourself than it is. Questions? All right, here is number 7. My segment symbol's getting a little out of control here. We are trying to find the midpoint of segment PQ. What's the first step? Add the x's. Which ones are the x's? Negative 1 and negative 4. Good. Which ones are the y's? 2 and 1. Divide that one by 2 as well. These will both be improper fractions. If you want to go mixed numbers, you can. I'm just going to leave them, though. So that's going to be negative 5 halves and positive 3 halves. If you made those improper, it'd be negative 2.5. Or sorry, they are improper. If you made them mixed numbers, they'd be negative 2.5 and 1.5. How are we doing? Make sure you're putting parentheses around these. They're ordered pairs. It's not just a list of numbers. All right, here's number 8. Give it a shot. We'll go over it in like a minute. Ready, go. What'd you get?
2, 1.
2, negative 1. Can anyone agree with this? That looks about right. If you're stuck, you are adding the x's. That's 0 and 4. Dividing that by 2. You're adding the y's. Dividing that by 2. That gives you 4 over 2, which is where the 2 came from. Negative 2 over 2, which is where the 1 came from. And, of course, every step of the way, it's in parentheses, so we're talking about an ordered pair. We good? You ready for the final example of the day? All right, let's just get it done quick. What am I doing? X's first. Which ones are X's? 4 and negative 3. Divide that by 2. All right, so what do we get for our X value? 1 over 2. Good. What do we get for the Y's?
1.
Yeah, we end up with 2 over 2, which reduces to a whole number of 1. All right, that is it for the day. I'm going to give you your homework. Remember, your test grades are in the grade book. We will not go over them till tomorrow. If you did not take it on Friday, you need to see me and make arrangements.